Good evening and welcome again, everyone. Thank you all for joining. Let's see, we all went around and just said hello and where we are from. And since that time, we had one person join us. Neil, do you want to just say hello and tell us what stage of shamatha you're dialing in from, or where you're geographically?
Good evening, everybody. I'm very glad to be joining you. Sorry, I'm late. I am currently in New York City, and
Cool.
generally I'm here.
Welcome. Great to see you. Thanks so much
Thank
for
you.
joining us. And then also Mary Beth Keene has joined us. Please say hello.
Hello, I'm in Golden Bridge. I'm happy to be here.
We're happy to have you. Great to see you. What a cool name, Golden's Bridge. So, we always start with a little chant, and I'll screen share that in case folks are unfamiliar with that. Oh, right. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. Whatever the virtues of the many fields of knowledge, all are steps on the path of omniscience. May these arise in the clear mirror of intellect. O Manjushri, please accomplish this. So, this course is in, in some ways it's a welcome relief from a couple of the past two courses that we've been doing in the Rime Shaver, which are extremely challenging intellectually, and a lot of reading philosophy, called Realizing the View, which are explorations of the entire range of Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist thought about the view of what's the nature of reality, beginning with the Buddha, progressing through the Abhidharma, Madhyamaka, Yogacara, Buddha nature, and some synthesis movements that happened in India. So we just finished up 6 months of those. No, more like 9 months of those. And thought it would be really nice to have a break and go back to meditation. And so here we are, and it's also a wonderful way of going through this new book on meditation by Alan Wallace, one of my teachers, and let's see. And in some ways, this course is the second part of a two-part series of courses exploring the meditation teachings of Alan Wallace, B. Alan Wallace. A few years ago, we did a part one on that, which let's see if I can share. Here we go. So here's our website, by the way, in case you haven't seen it. I have two choices for searching for past courses by topic or chronologically, and there's a division of courses where it was early on, and the recordings were lost when Shambhala Center lost a huge batch of recordings somewhere around 2008 or so, and then once with recordings. And then here's the chronological. So recently we've been doing this Realizing the View courses, and before that we did a 5-part series on Moonbeams of Mahamudra. And we also broke that up with a study of a text by Maitreya Dharmadharmata Vibhanga, famous text by Maitreya. But here we did a course on Taking the Mind as the Path, Part 1. So in some ways this is Part 2 of this course. So this was focused on the overview of Shamatha Vipassana and then primarily Shamatha in various practice traditions of Buddhism. And so it's nice to be able to come back to that sequence. Always when you have a Part 1, it's nice to someday get back to Part 2. And so in some way this is Part 2. Can you see when I flipped screen between the two views of the website? So now I'm in the one by topic, and here I'm in the one by, okay. And the one by topic is in reverse chronological, in descending chronological order. So here's this course, and you can see all the other ones. Hopefully folks have had a chance to get the text that we're going to use for this Shamatha Vipassana, an anthology of Pith Instructions.
I ordered it, but I haven't received mine yet.
Okay. I can share the first readings with you. Anybody that needs that, let me know.
I should have it by next week, though.
Okay, good. And so this book we'll find is largely focused on Vipassana. It does have some chapters on Shamatha. And so the question that I have about designing the course around this book was, are we going to want to visit Shamatha in some way? And I think many of us have visited Shamatha many, many times in great depth, and maybe some of us haven't. And so I think we'll go and progress into the syllabus that I've created from the book, which includes a lot of the readings, but not all of them. And I'll come back to that. And we'll see if we feel like it would be helpful to add in some very good summary of the traditional version of Shamatha practice to give a grounding in that, since many of them are focused on Vipassana. And I've chosen, instead of going through every text in the book, which I think we wouldn't have been able to do in the time allotted, I've chosen to omit certain texts. There's a lot of texts that are not actually really about Shamatha Vipassana that are in here. And so this book has a large amount of really wonderful texts, but it is a compilation of translations that one of the greatest translators of our times has compiled over the years in translating for various teachers, primarily His Holiness the Dalai Lama and his second root guru, Gyalcho Rinpoche, Domon Gyalcho Rinpoche, Enigma Lama, who lived in the Bay Area in Oregon and is in the lineage of Dujum Lingpa. And so the book in some way is just like, okay, let me gather together all these texts that I've translated and never published and put them out there, make them accessible, which is a really fabulous service to those of us who are interested in texts like these. However, it's a little bit of a hodgepodge in that there are a number of texts that are not really about shamatha vipassana, but sort of he's filling out this idea of having texts from each of the four traditions of Tibetan Buddhism, Kadampa / Gelugpa, Kadampa being the precursor to Gelugpa, from Atisha to Tsongkhapa, and the Sakya tradition, and the Kagyu and the Nyingma tradition. And so I've left out a number of little texts that are not focused primarily on shamatha vipassana. And I've kept in a number of them that aren't as well, because there's some key texts, and it's also a chance for us to explore what are the key texts of some of these traditions. So, for example, in the Sakya section, there's a text called Parting from the Four Attachments. So if you flip through your table of contents, actually, you'll see part one is Core Teachings and Translations by Buddhist Masters. And so that part and that title is in distinction to, if you flip to the end of the table of contents, is part two. It's Pith Instructions for Aspiring Contemplatives in the 21st Century. And in my opinion, this was the most interesting part of the book for me, because I'd seen a number of the other texts in other places, and I'd not seen these. And the end here is Alan Wallace's own presentation of the path of shamatha vipassana from a Dzogchen tradition point of view. So I'm excited to get to that part. But if we go back to the beginning of the book, Core Teachings and Translation by Buddhist Masters, we have Atisha and the Kadam tradition. And of these texts, really, number 4 is about Vipassana. It's a commentary on a very short 1.5, 2-page text by Atisha on basically Vipassana practice that many of us have seen before, Madhyamaka Upadesha. And then we go to the words of Manjushri, the Sakya path. We see a number of texts around this core text called Parting from the Four Types of Attachment, or clinging, as he translates it. Most translators have translated this text as the four types of attachment. And it's a very famous text in the Sakya tradition, but does not have a lot on shamatha vipassana. But I thought it was worth having some of that in here in our course, so we become familiar with the different traditions. And each tradition has a wonderful little introduction that you'll see. The book says composed and translated. So the composition part is that last section, which is Lama Alan Wallace's own compositions. And the rest of it is translated except for the introductions, which are composed to each section. And those are primarily written by his partner, Eva Natanya, who now does a lot of the teaching with Alan of his retreats, and helps him with translation and writing. And she's an amazing scholar. She's quite phenomenal. She received her PhD from Harvard, and on studying the completion stage practice of Tsongkhapa as presented in the Guhya Samaja Tantra, which is the main Tantra system of the Gelugpa tradition. So she adds a lot to this. And if you listen to his teachings over the last few years now, she's included a lot of the time. She's really an amazingly wonderful teacher, very knowledgeable, and very well speaks very well. So just to continue along with this review of the table of contents, then we have the words of Manjushri and Vajrapani. And it's sort of neat the way we have the words of Manjushri on top with the Sakya, and the words of Manjushri and Vajrapani. And what you don't necessarily pick up on right away is that back on the page prior, Atisha and the Kadam tradition. Kadam means sacred word or sacred teaching. Ka is pronouncement or word or command, and Dom is sacred. So there's these three traditions really that are based on sacred word, sacred teaching from the teacher, from various versions of the so-called teacher. And in the case of the Sakya and the Gelug traditions, back on what is page numeral V111, the second page of the table of contents, we see the words of Manjushri, whereas it's presented that way because Sachin Kunka Ningpo received these teachings directly from Manjushri, appeared to him and received these teachings. And this is becomes a very common occurrence, well, not very common, but a repeating thing that happens in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition is great bodhisattvas or great teachers from sort of other realms, so to speak, appear to individuals, humans, and present them with teachings. And so here we have Manjushri presenting this text to Sachin Kunka Ningpo. And then in the case of Tsongkhapa, he had direct connection also with Manjushri and also with Bodhisattva Vajrapani. And in the Gelugpa section, which is the words of Manjushri and Vajrapani, view, meditation, and conduct is taught to Tsongkhapa, taught to Tsongkhapa. Interestingly, really the main text on Shamatha Vipassana here is on the number 12 on the union of Shamatha Vipassana. The synthesis of practice has a little bit on it. It's very short, but really the key text is this union of Shamatha Vipassana, which is from Tsongkhapa's smaller stages of the path to enlightenment. He was famous for having written two texts on the path to enlightenment, the gradual stages of the path to enlightenment. The most famous one is the great stages of the path to enlightenment in Tibetan, Lam Rim, which means gradual path or gradual stages. Chenmo, and Chenmo means great, is the short name for it. And this one is from the shorter of those two texts, or the concise one. And there's a wonderful presentation of Vipassana in that text. And and here we have the chapter on the union of Shamatha Vipassana. Alan Wallace has translated the chapter on Shamatha in another book called Balancing the Mind. And in some ways, to me, it's a little disappointing that he doesn't repeat it here because it would go well together to have that, the Shamatha chapter, and it's called the Union, but it's primarily a presentation of Vipassana. And then on page Roman numeral IX, or 9, we have the words of Avalokiteshvara, who appears the Bodhisattva of Compassion, who has a connection with Mingyur Dorje, who is the progenitor of the Payal tradition from which Painter Rinpoche is the leader these days, or was until his death, and a member of that tradition in the name of Karma Chakme, who was also a Kagyu, a great Kagyu teacher. So he's one of the early ones that brings together the Mahamudra tradition and the Dzogchen tradition. And he's famous for a text called The Union of Mahamudra in Dzogchen and Maha'ati that many teachers have taught upon. And he becomes a holder of Mingyur Dorje's tradition. And he has a wonderful presentation of Shamatha Vipassana that we have repeated here, which have huge amount of quotations from various texts, and we may find that the actual substance of the presentation is a little bit small, let's say. And then we have Shamatha Vipassana and Guru Yoga in the teachings of Dujam Lingpa and Sarah Condra. So, Dujam Lingpa is one of the major Teratons in the Nyingma tradition. The Nyingma tradition has two lines of transmission from its progenitor Padmasambhava and Vimalamitra, and to some extent Vairochana, the three masters who brought the teachings that now are called Nyingma tradition into Tibet in the 8th century. And those two traditions are the Terma traditions, the hidden text traditions that were the amazing project of Padmasambhava and his colleague Yeshe Tsogyal, who really is the one that was the mastermind behind the whole Terma tradition of meticulously going about hiding texts in various places and in various people. So there's basically two types of terma, hidden texts. One is physical texts that are hidden in rocks and the ground and things like that, and also includes objects, practice objects. And then the other type of terma is texts that are not physically manifest, but are implanted in the mind streams of disciples at that time, who would then take birth later on and discover those teachings. The idea with the Theravada tradition was that the Teraton has a direct connection in that way to Padmasambhava, and so each time a Teraton discovers and brings forth a text that was planted by Padmasambhava and Yeshe Tsogyal, it creates that direct short lineage to Padmasambhava. There's a number of different Terma lineages in the Tibetan tradition. Earlier on in the transmission of Buddhism from the West, from the East to the West, many teachers were from the tradition of Longchen Ronpa, as discovered and sort of organized and presented by Jigme Lingpa, Longchenpa being in the 13th, 14th century, and Jigme Lingpa being in the 18th century. So Khyentse Rinpoche and a lot of other Rinpoches associated with him were from the Longchen Yente tradition of Terma. But another major one was that of Dujam Lingpa, and that came over to the West in the form of Dujam Rinpoche, Dujam Jigdral Yeshe Dorje Rinpoche, who was an amazing scholar, as was Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. And he's the author of this amazing book called The History of the Nyingma Lineage, which is a huge volume that presents in enormous detail the history of the transmission of all the different Terma traditions and the other way that Nyingma was transmitted, which I'll get back to. So Dujam Lingpa was, Dujam Rinpoche was recognized as one of the rebirths of Dujam Lingpa, who lived in about the 18th century as well, similar to Jigme Lingpa, and received Terma transmission of texts called the Vajra Essence directly from Padmasambhava in a visionary encounter, and wrote a massive commentary on that text, which is what Ala Wallace has been teaching over the last many years. We have this chapter taking the aspect of the mind as the path, which is the way that this Terma text by Dujam Lingpa presents the beginning stages of the path. That includes Shamatha Vipassana. It's working with the common operation of the mind as the path, as opposed to initially trying to change the mind, as many paths do, into something else. It just starts with the way that the mind operates and takes that as the path. Later on, it takes the result as the path. after a certain point, which is the way, like the Mahamudra tradition, is based on taking the result as the path. We talk about the continuity of ground, path, and fruition. It may be unclear what that distinction is, but we'll get to that further when we get to the text. It's a lot easier to understand that when we go through the texts. And then we have this, in number 17, we have another chapter from Vipas' commentary on that Dharma text from Padmasambhava. And then we have an odd little text by an amazing female Tirtan, Sarah Kondra, who's probably the greatest female Tirtan figure in Tibetan Buddhism since Yeshe Tsogyo. And discovered a number of dharmas was seen as some sort of emanation or incarnation or rebirth of Dujam Lingpa, and has a wealth of amazing writings which are now becoming available in English due to the work of a number of scholars. And here we have a text called Prerequisites for Practice of the Direct Crossing Over, which is one of the two phases of the formal Dzogchen practice. So that practice is extremely advanced and would not be appropriate to have in this book, but it has the prerequisites, which does include things like shamatha and vipassana. But it has, its emphasis is really on other things. So it's a little questionable. But the next one is, there's text by two contemporary masters, Domang Yongtong Rinpoche, who was another great Nyingma Tirtan who managed to live through the Chinese Cultural Revolution and the impact it had on Tibet, and then come to the West and teach. And wonderful summary of the ground of the view, meditation, and action by him. And then a text by Drupal Lama Karma, who's a Tibetan, one of the few Tibetans alive today that has actually accomplished shamatha. Which is, to actually accomplish shamatha fully turns out to be an incredibly rare occurrence in the Buddhist tradition to this day. And to some extent, I should have just gone through the preface, which I'd like to do now, and we'll see that in more detail. But just to give a quick little overview of this text, of the course. After that, we have Alan Wallace's presentations. And then in the syllabus, so let me show you the syllabus briefly. So that brings us through class 10, what's in the book. And if we have time, I'd love to go through the sutra, the main sutra source in the Mahayana tradition for shamatha vipassana, which is chapter 8 on shamatha vipassana meditation, from spelling mistake, unraveling, should be an A there, the Intent Sutra, the Samdinger Mochina Sutra, translated, retranslated recently, or newly translated by Gregory Forgue of the 8400 project. So the way this course works, as all initiator courses works, is that the syllabus is fluid, and we'll take things at the pace that they're manageable, instead of trying to push through to cover everything in a given class. And things often tend to spill over into the next class, so we'll just let that happen. And if we don't make it to that additional material, then we won't make it to that additional material. Much better to go through carefully and digest what we have in front of us than to add more when the current material is not well digested. So we'll just see how the pace goes and gauge it from there. So I'm gonna, the way these courses initiate are normally conducted is that we do what's called slow reading with commentary. And so I'm going to begin doing that with the preface and talk about it here and there. And please be comfortable to chime in and add comments, ask questions, or anything like that as we go through. And that was the purpose of everybody saying hello at the beginning, so we're all comfortable just shouting out and asking whatever is unclear. Sound like a plan? So on the afternoon of July 20th, 2023, while meditating in his solitary retreat above his hermitage Mio Somten Ling in Creston, Colorado. So he'll come back to that, what that place is, so I won't explain it now. He comes back to that at the end of the preface, just as dawn was breaking in India on this auspicious day, commemorating the Buddha's first turning of the wheel of the Dharma, which is theoretically around 7 to 8 weeks after his enlightenment, right? He spent 7 weeks just relaxing after his enlightenment, and for much of that time had decided he was not going to teach. And then finally he was talked into it. And so that would be about 7 to 8 weeks after the full moon of May, the 4th month, which is the Enlightenment Day. It occurred to me that I had in my possession a number of unpublished translations that I made over the past 40 years, containing precious teachings by some of the greatest Buddhist masters in history. I had offered oral teachings on many of these texts, but since each one is relatively brief, I had not yet found the right context in which to publish each one of them. With a burst of inspiration, I spent several hours compiling them like a garland of pearls into a sequence of Pith Instructions on the core meditations of Shamatha and Vipassana. Now he gives definitions of these two meditation practices at the bottom, which is really helpful. He gives the traditional definitions of Shamatha. Can be explained briefly as follows. By focusing the attention continuously without being diverted to other objects, the mind eventually rests naturally upon its chosen object. When exceptional joy and bliss of pliancy in body and mind arises. So this term pliancy is in Tibetan Xinjiang, which might be known to many Trungpa Rinpoche students. Trungpa Rinpoche talked about Xinjiang a lot, and he translated as synchronization or processed. That one was well processed, one was Xinjiang. He actually used the term, the Tibetan term as an English word, and added like a verb form to it. So he said Xinjiang. What is that? The past perfect particle or something like that of Xinjiang. And it is it appears a number of times in the path of Shamatha and the path of the 5 paths in Buddhism. So the first obstacle to Shamatha is laziness, and there's 4 antidotes to that, one of which is Xinjiang, is pliancy. And so pliancy or suppleness is another common translation for this. It's the sense of ease of body and mind in doing things, in physical activity and in mental activity. And in the case of Shamatha, it occurs as the antidote, one of the 4 antidotes to laziness early on, and then it's also marks the culmination of Shamatha, where after one experiences the 9th stage of completely pacified, or something like that, when then, if one continues, experiences Xinjiang in a very graphic physical sense of having a sort of wave of what's called blissful energy throughout the body and mind. And it's described in some interesting ways in the literature. But traditionally one does not actually accomplish shamatha until that pliancy arises, that experience. when the exceptional joy and bliss of pliancy in body and mind arises. And I say body and mind because there's pliancy of mind and body separately, and one has to experience the two in order to completely accomplish the practice. Then this concentration, which is his translation of samadhi, the term samadhi, which is a general term for accomplished meditation or transcendent meditation, Trungpa Rinpoche would usually say. Then it becomes, this concentration becomes shamatha. This arises simply from maintaining concentration on the mind inwardly. Now earlier he said, the mind rests naturally upon its chosen object. And for us, that's the breath. And we think of the breath as an external object. It's external to our mind, not necessarily external to our body. It sort of goes between internal and external, interestingly. But when you study the way that it's presented traditionally, we actually focus on the mental image of the breath, the mental representation of the breath in the mind consciousness. So any meditation that we do on any external object, as it progresses past the very introductory stages, transfers from a meditation upon a external sense object, to the internal representation of that object. The external sense object is impermanent, it's constantly changing, and requires an activity of the mind to constantly connect with the sense consciousness. So in order to actually achieve samadhi of unified, one-pointed meditation or concentration, one needs to have as one's focus, an internal mental image. So when we meditate on the breath, we're actually meditating on the mental image of the breath. Similar to, this is presented by Trungpa Rinpoche when he presents the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And he talks about the psychosomatic body. And he talks about how we're actually meditating upon our mental experience of the body. And this is what he's talking about. He's talking about how the real object of our meditation is the mental consciousness's experience of anything, whatever it is. So this arises simply from maintaining concentration of the mind inwardly without being distracted. It does not rely upon fathoming the actual nature of any phenomenon. So that phrase, fathoming the actual nature of any phenomena, is part of the definition of Vipassana, even though he doesn't specifically include it there by implication. That is what Vipassana includes, fathoming the actual nature of a phenomenon, as opposed to using a phenomena as a focus of attention, of applied attention. We're actually understanding the nature of a phenomenon. Vipassana can be defined as the wisdom imbued with the exceptional bliss of pliancy. So again, until Vipassana, the practice of Vipassana results in the experience of pliancy, it's not accomplished full Vipassana. That arises in dependence upon shamatha and comes about by the power of discerningly investigating the phenomena upon which the mind focuses. So this is the traditional version of Vipassana. It's an active practice, an active sort of intellectual practice or activity, discerningly investigating the phenomena upon which we focus. And it results, going back to the end of the first definition, it results in fathoming the actual nature of any phenomenon. So those are helpful to understand. And that's different than we've learned from Trungpa Rinpoche in many ways. And we've had many classes on this, courses on this, and many discussions, and we will have many more. I'm happy to have them here as well. Christy.
Yeah, I think that's what I was gonna kind of respond to, that shamatha, my understanding up until this point has just been more as a practice, that it's about concentration, not so much the result of this pliancy. So, according to what he's saying here, you're not really practicing shamatha unless you have both of those aspects happening. There's concentration and the pliancy that arises. Is that right? Like, it's just not about concentration.
Yeah, so I'll give you the sort of technical traditional answer to that, which is they say that many terms are given the name of their resultant phase, or many activities are given the name of the result that they bring about, if that means anything to you. So shamatha is the practice that results in shamatha. And so you could say, like, the combined application of mindfulness and awareness results in the state of shamatha. But instead we say shamatha, and we say shamatha includes the sustained practice of mindfulness and awareness. And shamatha results in itself. It results in the accomplishment of that effort, which is then called shamatha. So that's like a silly little linguistic little explanation that they will often give. But shamatha is not true shamatha until it's fully perfected, which is just it's in the sutra that I mentioned, added at the end of the course by the Buddha, where he's asked that question and he gives that unequivocal response. And so when the tradition is being technically precise, they will present it that way. But shamatha is the practice that results in the experience of complete focused concentration that is signaled by the experience of pliance.
And then samadhi is different than shamatha?
Great question. Yeah, so samadhi is a general term for accomplished meditation practice. Samadhi is unmoving concentration. And in Trungpa Rinpoche's usage, he gives concentration a negative spin, saying we're not looking to concentrate, that concentration leads to an absorption state. But so we have to understand the nuance that he's giving to that term concentration, and accept that the remainder of the tradition uses concentration in two ways. One is that it is the main factor involved in the absorption meditations, but it's also the main factor involved in just an accomplished stage of meditation practice, where there's a concentrated experience of meditation. And so there's many different samadhis. So in the Mahayana tradition, in some sutras and some parts of that tradition, there's a scheme of 4 stages of samadhis. The lion's stride, the sky-going samadhi. I don't know, they have these weird names, but then when you read the sutras, there's thousands of samadhis, the samadhi of this, the samadhi of that. So basically it's applied to the completion of any meditative practice. And so in particular, the relevance of that is that they describe the completion of shamatha as shamatha samadhi, and the completion of vipassana as vipassana samadhi. And then the union of shamatha vipassana, when it's complete and full, it's then called shamatha vipassana samadhi. And so samadhi has this general meaning of accomplished, advanced meditation, and can have many types. However, in the Buddhist tradition, there's starting with that chapter of that sutra by the Buddha, and then everybody since then, there's this common view that all samadhis can be summed up into shamatha and vipassana. And so they'll classify different practices that we know of, such as like Tonglen, as basically a shamatha type practice. Meditation on the breath is a shamatha practice, obviously. And then vipassana practices are things like understanding the difference between a definition, that which is defined, and let's see, definition, definiend, and an example. It's understanding how any meditation or meditative activity that revolves around investigating the nature of phenomena to determine their actual nature is determined to be vipassana meditation. So that can be when we learn about prajna and the 3 stages of prajna, those can actually be considered all vipassana practice. So hearing the teachings about the 3 marks of existence, about selflessness, about emptiness, those are vipassana post-meditation, let's say. And then contemplating the second type of prajna can sort of span post-meditation. It can be just like thinking over things as you go by your day, or it can be on the cushion where you actually contemplate selflessness. And then meditation is where you would formally look at the main ways of understanding selflessness, which is the main focus for Vipassana meditation, as opposed to investigating the nature of, you wouldn't spend your time practicing Vipassana on the nature of an apple as being like sweet or sour or bitter or crisp. Although those could be Vipassana meditations, but they would be a waste of time. One would spend one's Vipassana meditation focused out on understanding the 3 marks, in particular selflessness. So there's a number of different ways that meditations can be done in the Vipassana vein, revolving around selflessness of persons and phenomena. And just to give a quick example, the main way of meditating, doing Vipassana meditation upon selflessness of the person, is to identify the sense of self first, and then to compare the sense of self with the 5 skandhas, and say, in what way is my body the self? And we understand that first we have to come to an understanding of what is it that we consider the self to be. The self has certain qualities. We think that the I is unchanging throughout our life. While everything else changes, there's some part of us that is unchanging. And while we have many different aspects to ourselves, we feel like there's one aspect that's, we feel that the I is unitary. It doesn't have like many parts to it. We may have different emotional tendencies and personality tendencies, and clearly our body has different parts, but we feel that the self is unitary. It continues through time. It's persistent or continuous. So I'm the same person as I was when I was a little kid. We all believe that. And we believe that myself is neither bigger or smaller than it was when I was a kid, even though my body has gotten, unfortunately, many times bigger than when I was a little kid. And then the third quality is that we feel we're independent. We feel that we're independent operators. Like, I think I decide what to say and think and do. And so the analytical practice of Vipassana, focused on understanding the selflessness of the person, takes those 3 qualities of what we feel like the self is, and we compare it to the experience of our skandhas. Is my body unchanging? Obviously not. Is it unitary? Obviously not. Is it independent? Obviously not. It's constantly conditioned by this and that. And the same thing with feelings, perceptions, formation. And consciousness is the hardest one. We think that in our consciousness there's some little part of us, and maybe as we become sophisticated meditators and Buddhist scholars, we think it's our awareness is really the self. And that's where those three qualities live. And so that's included in the longer practice of the Sutrayana tradition of comparing the sense of self with the skandhas in Vipassana, which would be the main practice of Vipassana. And in the Mahamudra tradition, we focus just on the mind, because that's really where we believe the self resides. And we look right at the mind, the awareness of the mind, and see, is that the self? What is the mind? And then one can do similar practices for the emptiness of the self of phenomena. Melissa.
Okay, I'm a little afraid to ask because my brain doesn't work like your brain, but I'm going to still ask. Is what you're describing with the practice with Vipassana, is that how's that different or the same as Shravaka in the progressive stages?
Oh, that's great. Okay, so Shravaka is a Sanskrit term that means hearer or listener, and is used to refer to the early students of the Buddha who actually heard his teachings or heard it from another person who heard it. And then it comes to be a way of referring to individuals who focus on the teachings that come from that tradition. And it's in some circles, as in the Three Yanas program, which, by the way, is a great program. I encourage all of you to go to it if you haven't. And I understand that Andy Carr has adopted the skillful means of referring to the early phases of the Three Yana path as the Shravaka Yana path, as opposed to what it has been called for 50 years, the Hinayana path. So the practices that I was describing are common to the Shravaka Yana, as you're using that term, or otherwise known as the Hinayana, and also the Mahayana. Those collectively are called Sutrayana traditions that are based on the sutras, and Vajrayana technically is based on the tantras. And so the Sutrayana have that sort of, both Shravakayana and Mahayana have that sort of understanding and practice of Vipassana as being the analysis of a sense of self compared to the aggregates, the skandhas. Many of you may have studied Shantideva's Bodhicharyavatara, Entering the Way of the Bodhisattva, and that is the practice that he presents in that book for the analysis of the self, is comparing to the skandhas. And that's the most common scheme in both the Hinayana and the Mahayana. The way that it's presented in the Three Yana path, understanding that when we talk about the Three Yana path, we're immediately placing ourselves in a certain framework that has a certain way of characterizing the rest of Buddhism, which is fine. Everybody does that. It's just helpful to understand that that's what we're doing, and it's not universally viewed the way we necessarily view it when we do that. But the nuance in that Sutrayana tradition is that the so-called Shravaka tradition focuses on selflessness of persons exclusively. And in the Mahayana tradition, the focus of Vipassana practice and the prajna and emptiness extends to the phenomena, to all dharmas. And one would do similar practices, analytical, investigatory practices, to understand the emptiness of phenomena, looking at phenomena in a similar way. Sure. So this is good. It's very important to drill into these things instead of just letting them pass because you think maybe other people know this. It's really good to bring these up. So let's see. He compiled these into a garland of pearls on the core meditation of Shamatha Vipassana to share with others in the hope that they might appreciate that. And so he and his partner in teaching the Natanya have compiled them and added to and embellished this garland to form the present anthology. The garland begins with two conversations between Atisha, often viewed as the speech emanation of Guru Rinpoche Padmasambhava, and also as a previous incarnation of the Panchen Lama. So I think everybody knows the Dalai Lama, but in the Gelugpa tradition, there's another major teacher and incarnation lineage known as the Panchen Lama. That's considered to be just second, slightly to the Dalai Lama, and which has this odd relationship in that the Panchen Lama is said to be the incarnations of Atisha, and the Dalai Lama is said to be the incarnation of Atisha's student, Dromten. So in some way they're sort of switched. And he's recognized as an emanation of Avalokiteshvara, Atisha, and a previous incarnation of his student, Dromten, was recognized as an emanation of Avalokiteshvara and a previous incarnation of the Dalai Lama. And when he first encountered this conversation, he felt like he slipped into a time machine and was there with them in person. So he added those texts to this anthology, and then added a text by Atisha on the nature of the two realities, the two truths, followed by a commentary on his Indian disciple Prajna Moksha on Atisha's Pith Instructions on the Middle Way. So this is the key text in that section, which is that Atisha has this very short text that basically presents how to do Vipassana practice in 4 stages, which is very similar to the 4 stages mapped out in the bodhicitta slogans, the absolute bodhicitta slogans. If you remember your slogans, has everybody here studied the slogans of Atisha? The 7 points and the 59 slogans, right? So after first you train in the preliminaries, then second is the main practice training in bodhicitta, which is 2 types, ultimate and relative. And ultimate bodhicitta has meditative slogans, and then 1 post-meditation that has 4 meditation slogans, beginning with
Regard all
dharmas as dreams. Right, so experience the whole of phenomena as empty, dreamlike. And then, second one,
examine the nature of unborn awareness.
altogether, examine the nature of unborn awareness, which is looking at the perceiver and seeing that the perceiver also is empty. And then the third one is
self-liberate. No.
Yeah. Self-liberate even the antidote.
right. So self-liberate, even the antidote. What's the antidote
Meditation.
specifically?
Emptiness.
Emptiness. Yeah. So it's referring to the realization of the first 2 slogans. And it's phrased that way because we've used emptiness as the antidote to the poison of believing that things are real. Believing the self is real, believing phenomena are real, which is considered to be poison. Why?
With more reification,
Something about reification.
considering emptiness to be anything other than that runs the risk of being of reifying emptiness.
And why is that a problem?
That's what the poison is, reification, attachment.
There's a little bit further step that I'm trying to get to, which is like the basic
Nihilism,
crux of the
being
situation.
nihilistic.
The poison is it's the belief in the reality of self and phenomena. Belief in the reification of anything is considered to be poison because it's. Do you remember your Four Noble Truths?
The cause of
It's
suffering.
the cause of suffering, right? So that's the main poison of samsara, is that which produces suffering. It's the very origin of suffering. When we have the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha said desire is the cause of suffering. And he was sort of giving that the most tangible level of manifestation of the cause of suffering,
And
which is
so
really
with
ignorance.
emptiness, you were saying
So
why?
emptiness is the antidote to that poison,
Oh, okay.
right? So it's as if the poison is real and the antidote is real. We apply it, emptiness, as if it's real and it's taking care of the poison of believing things to be real, which causes suffering. And so the third slogan is let go of the idea that any of that is real, that there was like a real suffering, that there was a real ignorance that needed to be fixed by some thing called emptiness. And then the fourth slogan is
Rest in the nature of Alaya, the essence.
rest in the nature of Alaya. It's just let go of all doing and just settle in the state that's before everything. So hopefully we're all familiar with the 8 consciousnesses. We have the 5 sense consciousnesses, the 6th consciousness, the mental consciousness, is sort of the active person we think we are, and sort of coordinates the 5 consciousnesses. And then we have the 7th consciousness, is the ego consciousness, or the klesha consciousness, that is constantly believing that we exist independently. And that provides the fuel for the ongoing momentum of the experience of consciousness as those 2 aspects. And then the 8th consciousness is the repository. And the term for all of those is Vijnana. They're all consciousnesses in Sanskrit, Vijnana. And the 8th consciousness is called Alaya Vijnana. And so the first 5 consciousnesses, the I consciousness, is the consciousness of visual forms. And then there's the consciousness of auditory dharmas. And the consciousness of olfactory, smells and so forth. So we have the consciousness of. The 6th consciousness is the consciousness of mind consciousness. And the 7th consciousness is the klesha consciousness, the consciousness that maintains the klesha of thinking that we exist. That leads to all the root and subsidiary kleshas. And the alaya consciousness is the consciousness that's conscious of the alaya. And so when Rinpoche presents the bodhicitta slogans and those absolute ones, he gives a little hint that there's like a 9th level. There's this ground, alaya, that's beyond the alaya consciousness, that's beyond the 8 consciousnesses. And he explains that when we rest in the alaya, it literally says we rest in this ultimate ground of all phenomena. It's the ground of everything, of samsara and nirvana both. And we try to rest in that. And that state is beyond consciousness. It's beyond the alaya consciousness. And that's not really possible until you're enlightened. But we emulate that in our practice. And so Atisha, he has a short little text that presents these 4 stages in a wonderfully short and to the point way. And here we have a commentary on that text, which is really cool to have a text that, because Atisha's text is so short and sweet, it's really nice to have a text that unpacks that. So back on page Roman numeral 12, now the 2nd paragraph. The next jewel I plucked from my satchel, funny way of phrasing it, was the Avers, the mind training of Geshe Langri Tongpa, one of the great masters of the Kadam tradition founded by Atisha and Jerome Tongpa. So there's 2 main texts that are famous in the Lojong tradition. One is the 7 Points and 59 Slogans of Atisha, which is really a text by somebody else that Atisha sort of packaged and made famous, interestingly. And there's this other one that is a short little text in 8 stanzas, 4 lines each, that sums up the Lojong attitude. And so if you've never read that text, it's nice to have it and to check it out. It's just a couple of pages. And His Holiness chose this as for his first public teaching in the West in the summer of 1979 in Switzerland, for which Alan Wallace had the honor of serving as his interpreter. Earlier, so that was in 79, earlier Alan Wallace had studied Tibetan for a year at university, and then studied further at the Pith Institute in Switzerland in preparation for going to Dharamsala in northern India, where the Dalai Lama and the Tibetans had all settled. And then during that time, he had the fortune to come under the guidance of a Sakya Lama, Sherpa Gyaltsab, a Vipa, famous Sakya scholar of this era. And he taught him the first Tibetan Buddhist text, and being a Sakya, he taught him this core text of the Sakya tradition, part of the 4 types of clinging, which is a very wonderful way of summing up the different stages of the Buddhist path. We have the 4 dharmas of Gampopa, we have the 3 yanas, we have various schemes and ways of summing up the progression of the path. We have the slogans of Atisha that we just went through. But this one says that if I'm focused on, first is the attachment to this life, to trying to achieve a better place in this life. And that's what most people spend their time doing, trying to create a better samsara. That's the first attachment, is attachment to samsara. The second attachment is to the next life, which is not that common in the West, but is common in other parts of the world, where a lot of people in the world will spend their whole life thinking, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z because I'm going to have a better rebirth. And a lot of the Hinduistic traditions are based on that. And to some extent, a lot of the traditional Buddhist cultures have that framework for the lay Buddhists, where their role is to support the monastics and to live a virtuous life so that in their next life they could be a monastic. And so there's this sense of like, okay, I'm preparing for a better rebirth. So I'm attached to samsara still in that sense of like, I want a better rebirth my next life. So I'm going to focus on, that's going to be like the frame of reference for my activity. And then the third level of attachment is attachment to nirvana. And that's a way of characterizing what Melissa referred to as the Shravaka yana mentality of enlightenment for oneself, liberation for oneself. That's my main goal, is I just want to depart from this realm of misery called samsara. And that's considered still a level of attachment. And you still have that way of clinging to what's going on, to believe that there is a nirvana. And then the final level of clinging is just clinging to existence in general, when we overcome that, we become a true bodhisattva who has no clinging to anything of any sort. It doesn't have any objective of like the next lifetime or some limited sense of nirvana or anything like that, but has completely understood emptiness, and from that flows great compassion for all sentient beings. So there's this key text that presents that scheme, which was revealed in a divine vision by Manjushri to Sachi Kukaningpa, the son of the founder of the Sakya order. So the Sakya is a family lineage. It goes from initially from father to son, and now for many generations it has gone from father to nephew, interestingly. This essential dharma is revered by masters of all schools and included here a translation with concise commentary on it as well by the grandson, as well as translated excerpts from an eloquent 21st century oral commentary by Kenshin Api, another well-known contemporary Sakya scholar. Shortly after His Holiness's teaching in Switzerland in 79, Alan Watts had the privilege of interpreting for him in another place in Switzerland. I can pronounce Tibetan and Sanskrit easier than I can pronounce these places in Switzerland. I don't know about you guys. He gave an oral commentary to the 7th Dalai Lama's text, The Shower of Cities, Guidance in the View of the Middle Way, as the Song of the Four Recollections or Mindfulnesses. This was published early on in the transmission of Buddhism to the West by Wisdom Publications, called A Song of the Four Mindfulnesses. And I got it and anxiously dove into what I thought was going to be the four foundations of mindfulness. And I discovered it was this totally other scheme of four, which was equally interesting, but what I was looking for being focused on meditation, which summarizes four crucial themes of practice, beginning with Guru Yoga and finishing in the non-duality of appearances and emptiness. Another key text of the Gelugpa tradition. To provide context for this composition by the seventh is preceded here by the special practical instructions Noble Monk Manjushri bestowed upon the great Dharma king Tsongkhapa, the progenitor of the now known as Gelugpa tradition, upon which the the 7th Dalai Lama explicitly based his Song of the Four Recollections. It's well known that J. Tsongkhapa, J being an honorific, shortened for Jetson, like Sachin Kunming, but before him experienced visionary encounters with the embodiment of the wisdom of all the Buddhas appearing in the form of the youthful Manjushri. This part I love. Initially, these encounters took place through the mediation of somebody else, Lama Umapa Pavo Dorje, who had gained extraordinary ability to converse directly with Manjushri and was able to pose some Tsongkhapa's questions to this divine being for him. Isn't that cool? The root verses of Tsongkhapa's longer text, Guidance in the Middle Way, were revealed to Lama Umapa and Tsongkhapa in this way. And later on, he gains the ability to talk to him directly. Following these parallel texts from Tsongkhapa and the 7th Dalai Lama on the View of the Middle Way, the second revelation, Tsongkhapa here captures the essence of Manjushri's Pith Instructions even more succinctly. This synthesis of practice, spoken directly to Tsongkhapa himself, consists of core instructions for practice in solitary retreat, and bears a distinct resonance with the teachings of Mahamudra Dzogchen to show Tsongkhapa's mature understanding of how to meditate on emptiness in the base of shamatha, and then how to unite this vipassana with shamatha while following the scriptural traditions of India as well as the Kadam tradition of Atisha. We've included the crucial sections on the union of shamatha and vipassana from Tsongkhapa's concise presentation of the stages of the path of enlightenment. This is what I talked about earlier. Moreover, we've chosen to include another important visionary text that appears in Tsongkhapa's collected works, Garland of Supreme Medicinal Nectars Q&A, which is actually transmitted and written down by one of his beloved teachers. He was known for his visionary encounters with Vajrapani, the Lord of Mysteries, who was revered as the great Bodhisattva who transmitted many of the Buddhist tantras to the human realm. You might wonder, how come the Tantras weren't known like early on by those Shravakas, those who like met the Buddha and experienced his teachings and received his teachings? They didn't record any Tantras. They didn't record any Mahayana sutras. So the Mahayanists and the Tantrikas are sort of have this task of explaining that omission from the historical record. Like, why did these Mahayana sutras appear later on by hundreds of years? And why did the Tantras appear later on by hundreds or even 1,000 years? And so they get these, they create, or I should say that the explanation is that these teachings were kept secret by great bodhisattvas and revealed at the appropriate time. And most of the tantric teachings were deposited with Vajrapani and kept in Vajrapani's library until the appropriate time. And he gave them out to different tantrikas as they became appropriate vessels to receive them. According to its vocabulary and content, this text is unmistakably an instruction toward Dzogchen practice. Though as far as we know, Tsongkhapa never studied with any Nyingma teachers directly, never commented directly on Dzogchen within his own writings. It's interesting that he admits here that Tsongkhapa had a visionary encounter with a Dzogchen teacher named Kumaradza, who was Longchenpa's main teacher. Thus, the presence of this text is a critically important anomaly within Tsongkhapa's life story, about which more will be said in the text below. Tsongkhapa himself was well known for his reverence for the Kadamba tradition, which traces back to Atisha and his student Dromton, and also for his transmission of the Ganden oral lineage of instructions on Mahamudra, stemming with his encounters from Manjushri. So, oral lineage means the hearing lineage. We would translate that as hearing lineage. Oral is an English word. And Ganden is the name of a monastery where Tsongkhapa established his first seat. And he had a number of encounters with Manjushri. These 4 texts from Tsongkhapa's corpus offer a sublime bridge between what became the Gelug tradition of Mahamudra, transmitted by Tsongkhapa. So the Gelug has its own transmission of Mahamudra from Tsongkhapa that he receives basically from the Drukpa Kagyu lineage of Mahamudra, Pakmadrupa's stream of the various schools of the Kagyu tradition. Gets incorporated into the Gelugpa tradition. And the Kagyu Nyingma lineages of Mahamudra and Dzogchen, which are represented in these texts, appearing later in the volume. While His Holiness had been Alamos's root guru since he met him in 71, he's indebted for whatever little knowledge and understanding he has of Mahamudra and Dzogchen traditions to the Venerable Domang Gyaltro Rinpoche, an incarnation of Mahasiddha Kunsong Sherab, and the first throne holder, who was the first throne holder of the Payal lineage, one of the 6 major monasteries of the Nyingma tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, and whom His Holiness the 16th Karma identified as an incarnation of the great Kagyu and Nyingma master Karma Chakme, who we'll see later. So Gyaltro Rinpoche has Alan translated and teach on Karma Chakme's text, which is why it's included here. I requested him to be my Lama in 1990, and he asked him to interpret for him a teaching he gave at the Shambhala Meditation Center, whatever that is, in Los Angeles on Shamatha Vipassana in the Mahamudra tradition presented by Karma Chakme. Many years later, they was able to complete his translation of his masterpiece. So he translates Karma Chakme's text. That these are 2 little chapters from there. Clearly 2 of the major chapters from it. But his books are called Naked Awareness and Spacious Path to Freedom. Between the 2 of those books, we have the full text by Karma Chakme, including these 2 chapters.
Would you repeat that? Naked awareness and
Spacious Path to Freedom. These 2 books, great books. Although the majority of the books are like preliminary and auxiliary topics, and the heart of the book is this Shamatha Vipassana chapter, and then there's one chapter on Mahamudra and one on Dzogchen. And they're from this text called The Great Commentary to Nyingma Dorje's Buddhahood in the Palm of Your Hand. And you may have heard that phrase before, Buddha in the palm of your hand. It's a common phrase in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, this idea that it's so close, it's like right in the palm of our hand. Instead of like having to search far away, as we do, we generally have that feeling that enlightenment is far away. And the idea in the Mahamudra and Dzogchen tradition is it's right here. In 1995, Gyaltsen Rinpoche first introduced me to Dudam Rinpoche's magnum opus. Among the visionary Dzogchen teachings that he, Dudam Rinpoche, received from his root lama, which was, so he didn't have a human lama, his root lama was an emanation of Padmasambhava appearing in a form of Saroruha Vajra, the lake-born Vajra. The text is the Vajra essence. Over the next 2 years, the Gyaltsen Rinpoche granted me the oral transmission as detailed oral commentary of this work. With a request that I translated into English, I was deeply inspired and devoted myself to the study and practice of these teachings ever since. And he really did focus on understanding these teachings. He received commentary from Gyaltsen Rinpoche a number of times. He translated it, he went through it a couple of 2 to 3 times, meticulously trying to get it, and really get every part of these. While the Vajra essence is quite short, it's like 30, 40 pages. The commentary on it is much more extensive, a few hundred pages. I've included 2 short commentarial works by Dudam Rinpoche on that Vajra essence, Terma, which present the quintessential instructions on the practice of Shamatha Vipassana within the Dzogchen tradition. The first is commentary on the visionary teachings he received on Shamatha from Saroruha Vajra. The second is a commentary of Vipassana, inspired by the visionary teachings that Dudam Rinpoche received from Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, and Saroruha Vajra, respectively. Following these highly streamlined excerpts describing the core practices for attaining insight into the ultimate nature of existence, we have inserted an excerpt from an even more advanced commentary by Sarah Kondra on the direct crossing over Togyo. So formal Dzogchen practice has 2 aspects: Trekcha, cutting through to primordial purity, and Togyo, crossing over to spontaneous presence. And what we receive a lot in the West is we receive general Dzogchen teachings on view, and this idea of applying that view of sort of effortlessness and spontaneousness to meditation practice in a general way. But those are not the actual formal practices of Dzogchen. Dzogchen, like Mahamudra, has a whole system of formal steps that one would go through in practicing Dzogchen in these 2 aspects of Trekcha and Togyo. So here we have this little commentary to the preliminaries, the final set of practices undertaken to achieve the rainbow body. So Togyo leads to this thing called rainbow body, where one dissolves one's body into light instead of dying, and one's body disappears. And this has happened a number of times in the last couple of 100 years as well. It's sort of well documented. You can read about it. There's a famous book by a Jesuit who was in Tibet trying to convert the heathen and experienced rainbow body. And there's a book by this Jesuit guy about rainbow body. It's mind-blowing. The liberation as body of life. This excerpt, however, is taken from the section on the preliminaries to the direct crossing over, includes a clear description of the level of realization required to engage in such a practice effectively. So it's a little bit of a warning, I think he puts in here. It's if you want to really practice these things, you got to have this amazing level of accomplishment before you even approach them. And he does express this view in other places, often in his teachings, that people get into these advanced practices without the proper foundations. As well as a magnificent presentation of Guru Yoga in its ocean context. Sarah Kondra's moving description of the Guru Yoga associated with the Togal practice can be applied at any level of the Vajrayana path. And indeed, such Guru Yoga is essential for an effective practice of shamatha vipassana as well in the Dzogchen tradition. Interesting that in Dzogchen they consider Guru Yoga as an auxiliary to shamatha vipassana, their style of shamatha vipassana, which is unique. And if one studies the shamatha vipassana in the Dzogchen tradition, and there's numerous sources for this from Tulku Ugyen Rinpoche's books and Tsoknyi Rinpoche's books. If you check out their books on the shamatha chapters and nature of mind chapters, you'll see what shamatha vipassana is in the Dzogchen tradition. And it's very similar to the way Trungpa Rinpoche taught meditation, we find. Though the root text for Sarah Kondro's commentary was revealed by Dujam Limpa himself, Sarah Kondro received the teachings on it from her own guru and spiritual partner, the fifth son of Dujam Limpa, Tulku Trime. So she's consorting with the son of Dujam Limpa, and she the text, the root text was revealed by Dujam Limpa, and she receives teachings on it from Dujam Limpa, the son, one of his sons. Returning to the personal narrative, much later in the fall of 2015, he was invited to co-interpret with the Nepalese monk Se Namka Dorje for Doma Yongtong Rinpoche, widely regarded as emanation Indian Dzogchen master Vimala Mitra, was one of the 2 or 3 main teachers that came from India to Tibet to bring what are now called the Nyingma teachings, so him and Padmasambhava, and a lifelong friend of Gyaltsen Rinpoche, as he granted his oral commentary to his own root text on Dzogchen entitled Somewhere to Be Meditation Contact, which is the next work in the volume. His Holiness Painter Rinpoche, the 11th throne holder of the Pyle lineage and 3rd holder of the title of Supreme Head of the Nyingma, referred to Yongtong Rinpoche as the most highly realized of all living Nyingma Lamas, so this was the most precious opportunity to receive direct teachings from him. Yongtong Rinpoche first commented on excerpts from Tisha's teachings in the Book of Kadam, and followed this with Pith Instructions on Dzogchen. Interesting pairing of mind training with advanced Vajrayana practice. While studying Dharamsala in the early 70s, the Dalai Lama appointed to teach foreigners Tibetan was Geshe Nawang Dorje, very famous scholar, authored a number of books, combined enormous erudition and a boundless flow of love for students and enthusiasm for Dharma. And he studied with him for more than a year. He gave an oral commentary on a famous text by Maitreya, the future Buddha, one of his 5 dharmas, ornament of clear realizations that presents the 5 paths to Buddhahood, and beginning with the Mahayana path of accumulation. And here Alan Wallace talks about this whole concept of achieving a certain level of progress in our lifetime that establishes a sense of a certain level of irreversibility on the Buddhist path. And he goes into this description of that, which I'm going to skip given our timing. Hopefully you'll read it later. So at the bottom of the next page, which is 17 in Roman script, returning to the more recent past, November 29, 2017, was granted personal audience with Dalai Lama. Told him about our plans for creating a center for contemplative research in Italy, with an emphasis on guiding practitioners to reach this Mahayana path of accumulation, which is the first of the 5 paths of the Buddhist tradition. And the distinction is that he's calling it the Mahayana path, and the Mahayana path in that text by Maitreya is presented as sort of following the accomplishment of the Hinayana path of accumulation to some extent. It's a little more complicated than that, but it's a sort of summary level. He agreed to write an endorsement for the project and added this interesting description. He said that while the Buddha's second turning of the wheel, and this is by the Dalai Lama, who's the main Galupa representative in the world. And the Galupa are famous for being prasangika madhyamaka. He added that while the Buddha's second turning of the wheel of Dharma, so the Buddha's, there's this notion of the Buddha having taught the Dharma in 3 waves, called, in 3 cycles, called turnings. First turning is the so-called Shravaka teachings of the Four Noble Truths. The second turning is the teachings on emptiness and the Bodhisattva path, as presented in the Prajnaparamita and related sutras. And the third turning is focused on the presentation of the Alaya Vijnana and the 3 natures and Buddha nature. So he says, the second turning of the wheel focuses on emptiness as an object, presumably of prajna, of wisdom. The third turning, including the Tathagata Garbha Sutra, in which the Buddha presents the features of the Buddha nature, presents Buddha nature, the ultimate nature of the mind, as a subject. And this is the Dalai Lama's way of bringing these 2 turnings together as complementary. Not saying one is better than the other, but showing that they work together. We understand the emptiness of all phenomena as object, and we understand our mind as Buddha nature. And that together, that understanding of the way that those come together, provides the basis for entering the Vajrayana path. He says, leads smoothly into the teachings of Mahamudra and Dzogchen. For many years prior to this, His Holiness had been emphasizing all over the crucial importance of achieving shamatha. When I commented that this would be a central practice to emphasize in our Center of Contemplative Research, which he now has established in Crestone, Colorado, where he lives, he being Alan Wallace. His Holiness was supportive, but also replied that nowadays virtually no one has achieved shamatha. A year later, it was to my enormous delight that I learned of a Bhutanese meditation master named Drupal Lama Karma, of whom it was said that he had become highly accomplished in the practice of shamatha through the years of intensive meditation retreats, progressed significantly in the path of Mahamudra Dzogchen. And he invited him to teach in Santa Barbara, where Alan Wallace had established the Santa Barbara Institute of Consciousness, I think it is, Consciousness Studies. And he agreed to share his personal experience of the accomplishment of shamatha and other stages of the path, which is really rare for Tibetans to do. They will rarely share their own personal experiences. But perhaps from the urging of other teachers such as the Dalai Lama, certainly from Alan Wallace, he had come to understand how helpful that would be to other people, other Western, in particular Western students, that it's actually possible. And what does that look like? As opposed to most other teachers will be very humble and talk themselves down, so to speak. And so here we have in this text the translation of that extraordinary account, including his guided meditation. All of the texts mentioned above were written by and for people who lived in traditional Indian and Tibet prior to the global domination of Western culture by way of European colonialism. And he says how struck he was about the difference of that world to our world when he read a biography of his teacher Gyalcho Rinpoche and what he went through. And I'm skipping ahead. He's basically leading into explaining his focus on achieving a certain level of the path called the middle, the Mahayana path of accumulation. And that represents a stage of non-regressing on the Buddhist path in the scheme of the Mahayana presentation by Maitreya. So he developed this focus upon it being presented by the Dalai Lama back in 1970 or early 70s, and that has remained a focus for him since then. Oh wait, I just went back a page. How did that happen? No, sorry. Drupal Lama Karma is repeated in the same place. But basically, he talks about the 5 obscurations to meditation and to a positive state of mind, and how those can be worked with. So on page 23 of this preface, a few pages forward, based on my own experience over the past 40 years, such a supportive outer environment in which one is surrounded by spiritual friends who aid in one's cultivation of the inner psychological prerequisites is exceedingly difficult to find both in the East and the West. For this reason, over the past several years, in collaboration with friends around the world, have developed 2 branches of the Center for Contemplative Research, one in Creston, Colorado, where there's so many different Tibetan Buddhist traditions, as you probably know, have centers now in Creston. And he was able to buy a Christian sort of type nunnery that is across the valley from the main town of Creston, where most of the other centers are, if that means anything to people here, and turn it into the Center for Contemplative Research, and one in Italy. And they're both focused on bringing people into and supporting people in solitary, long-term solitary retreat for years, focused on the accomplishment of shamatha. So finally, on the next page, 24, the first full paragraph. So we've included at the end of this volume, where does he describe his own compositions? Let's see.
I have one thing about that. It said that he's supporting these people to achieve shamatha and reaching the Mahayana path through realizing uncontrived bodhicitta in this lifetime. And he mentions it a couple of times.
Right,
So
that's his main focus. That he
yeah, but uncontrived bodhicitta, I don't know, that sounded so nice.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? So
Yeah.
this, the significance of that is that bodhicitta is, to use the pejorative way of describing it, it's something we contrive. It's a contrivance, something that we give rise to in an intentional way. This is an interesting idea. Most of us, I think, are from the tradition of Trungpa Rinpoche and related traditions, where meditation is a spontaneous development. And we're presented with that idea, and the practice is built around that idea. And most traditions in the West have that idea of meditation and the meditative state and enlightenment being like a sort of natural evolution and process that develops on its own if we give it its right circumstances. But Lojong bodhicitta, mind training, is actually something we intentionally give rise to. And so from compared to like the most uncontrived practice of Dzogchen, those practices of bodhicitta are considered to be contrived in the sense that we create the context for them, we talk ourselves into them, we give ourselves reasons, and we create these schemes of like Lojong, of Tonglen, of exchanging self and other through the breath, which is a way of experiencing, ideally, bodhicitta, and ideally bodhicitta that becomes spontaneous, so that compassion is immediate and is not like the result of a thought process of, oh, that person is suffering, I can see why, I can help them. So spontaneous bodhicitta has no thought.
So is this sort of saying, with this kind of accomplishment of shamatha vipassana, it's just it's just natural. not, it's not
This
a practice of that Tonglen.
the accomplishment of shamatha and vipassana would contribute to the accomplishment of uncontrived bodhicitta.
Yeah,
It's like one of the main prerequisites. The experience of uncontrived bodhicitta is an outcome of that
that's
Mahayana
good.
path of accumulation, and the main prerequisite of that, of achieving that stage of Mahayana path of accumulation, is shamatha vipassana. But anyway, the very last part of the book, he explains towards the end of the preface as being writings that he's developed over the years to support practitioners in those retreats, those two retreat centers, practitioners in long-term retreat, his own way of explaining to them the progression, the experience and progression and techniques and so forth of shamatha and vipassana. So that's the last three parts of that book. Cynthia, anything quickly, since we're just about out of time?
Yeah, just a couple of things on the bodhicitta thing. One was, is uncontrived essentially the same as absolute, and relative is the contrived, or is that not a?
They're similar. It's sort of like the way that we think of stabilizing meditation and analytical meditation. We tend to think that all shamatha is stabilizing and all analytical is vipassana, but that's not accurate. So you can have contrived ultimate bodhicitta, where you're trying to experience ultimate bodhicitta.
But that wouldn't really be ultimate. Well, I mean, my understanding is that ultimate bodhicitta is, on one hand, part of the Buddha nature, is it's already there. But
So there we have the difference between bodhicitta as a state that we experience versus a practice.
right, and so that's why I was wondering if it equated with relative on that level, that's the practice part, and that the
You can
ultimate.
have contrived relative and contrived ultimate practice. So we just went through the ultimate bodhicitta slogans. And so those are a way of practicing ultimate bodhicitta in a
But that's okay,
contrived.
so that's still contrived. Okay, so you think that there's both contrived and uncontrived.
Right, and then you can have contrived relative bodhicitta and you can have uncontrived relative bodhicitta.
So what would be an example of the uncontrived relative?
Is spontaneous generosity, where you're
Yeah, I
giving
mean,
life,
you see
giving your
people
life for someone else.
and they're just full of it. Yeah.
Something like that. Or, where you would do the paramitas without conceptualizing it, right? Would be uncontrived.
And so how would you characterize the ultimate, the uncontrived ultimate?
That's when you realize the true nature of the ultimate. That's when you experience the true nature of the ultimate, as opposed to trying to experience it through the four slogans. Thank you, everyone.
The doing paramitas without concept would also apply in the ultimate, right?
Yeah, yeah. And we have this contradictory or similar way of describing the paramita practice, where on the one hand we talk about them as like you're trying to practice or cultivate the perfection of generosity and discipline, but they're not perfections until they're
Mhm.
spontaneous and
Right.
uncontrived, right? And so there's this funny notion of prajna as being like the culmination in its place of the sixth paramita, as well as like you can't actually accomplish any of the others until
It's
you
the
have
prerequisite. Yeah,
accomplished prajna, right?
right.
So it's this sort of conundrum, right? Interesting. So thank you, everyone. I hope that was helpful, just as a way to give us an overview and before we dive into the details of these texts. And let's please please let me know how you feel about what I offered earlier of like maybe we take a little sidebar and dive into a nice presentation of the scheme of shamatha. So we have a basis on that, and we'll see if people feel that's necessary as we go into these texts. But I think you all have the syllabus, and hopefully that'll work for next week. And if anyone doesn't have the reading, let me know for next week. So we end with the usual dedication. By this merit may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death from the ocean of samsara. May I free all beings by the confidence of the golden sun of the great east. May the lotus garden of the Ritan's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Thank you again, everyone, and great to see you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.